Hey guys, it's Boki here from Gigi's Fabric Shop, home to Juki and Janome Junkies for a fun, free sew-along that I'm hoping you'll really enjoy. I've aimed this pattern to be super beginner quilt friendly, so if you've never dived into a quilting project and quilting is enticing to you, but it seems a little intimidating, this is gonna be the perfect project. So we're making a quilted laptop cover that's free, and you'll follow along in this video and you'll have one just like this by the end. So before we get into it, let me tell you what you can expect for this video and how we're gonna get through this project. So step number one to making this beautiful quilted laptop cover or mat, however you wanna use it, is we're going to download the free pattern. Where can you get it? How to do that and all that fun stuff. So we'll do that next. Then we're gonna start doing what you need, what you are required to have in order to make this project. If you can get a kit, we're gonna do our ironing and our cutting, all of our assembly. We're even doing our quilting of this project together, as well as our binding. So by the end, you really will have one that's all done up just for you. All right, so step number one, we have to get the pattern first. So this is a free pattern that I wrote just for you guys, so it's gonna be super easy for you to follow along. It's a downloadable PDF, so you're gonna head over to jukijunkies.com, you're gonna type in quilted computer pad pattern, you're gonna put it in your cart, it's $0, just follow the checkout instructions, and then you'll get the downloadable PDF just like so. The pattern is really nice. I'm gonna walk you guys through it, but there's lots of visuals and even a fun coloring page at the end, so that way you can kind of color it in and get inspiration of what you want your laptop mat to look like. So now let's talk about step number two, gathering all the things that we need to actually make the project. So for this pattern, you're gonna need a background color. The background color is the little neutral one color that stays consistent throughout the laptop mat. The way that I made the laptop mat and the way I've written the pattern for you guys is we have 6 different colors to give it that fun, multicolored look. I'm gonna kind of walk you through some color inspiration and let you know if you wanna do a more monochromatic look, kind of what you need, but let's just stick to the pattern and I'll guide you as we go. So you're gonna need about 1/3 of a yard of your background fabric, that one neutral colored square print that you need all the way around. And then you're gonna need 6 different colors for the kind of alternating colors for your checkered pattern. This is the pattern kind of inspiration color palette that I'm going to be using here today. So I'm using this fun little gingham as the background for the whole checkered design, and then I have these 6 fun colors. And I'm going to talk about color inspiration and how you can pick your colors, because that's probably the hardest part of this pattern, is picking the colors that you want, because there's just so many possibilities. That's exactly the issue I ran into as well. So I'm actually going to have this kit available for you guys on jukijunkies.com while supplies last. You'll notice that there's going to be this listing and there's going to be a mystery listing. So what the mystery listing is going to be, you're going to add it to your cart. There's going to be a little text box where you can kind of leave me instructions of what you like. You can always tell me what you don't like too, so then that way I know, like, if I really don't like pink, I won't send you pink. But you can tell me maybe what designers you like, what colors you like, and it's always fun to get a surprise. I do mystery bundles all the time, so that's always fun. But if you're watching this video, like, I don't know, maybe years in advance or something, and you're wondering where this is, it's while supplies last. All right, so the mystery bundle is going to come with your 6 colors that you need, your background color. It's also going to come with your backing and batting. So your backing piece needs to be about 22 by 17. So this is what I'm using. This print is so beautiful by Ruby Star Society. I can't wait to see how this comes to life. It's going to be so good. And then you need your batting as well, because this is a quilted laptop mat. So much like a quilt that you see behind me, it's going to have the top layer, the inside layer that gives it its body, and then of course the backing to put all the layers together. And then we're gonna do some fun quilting like you see here to get it all bound together. And then we're gonna bind it just like the quilt behind me. So this is gonna be super beginner friendly. You can absolutely tackle this project. This is a fun day project that you can do. It's gonna be super easy peasy. I'm even gonna include the binding in the kit as well. As far as the binding goes, you just need 2 strips that are 2 1/4 by 44 inches. Follow along in the pattern to see, but honestly, you probably have some scraps. I like to sometimes even use the scraps left over from these and do an ombre binding. That always looks really cool too. And then for your backing, you need a 22 by 17 inch piece, which is like a fat quarter. So that's what you need. Fun fact, I'm actually using Fusible fleece for my inside here, and I'm gonna explain why I like this a little better. But you can just use 100% cotton batting. It can be cream, it can be a blend, really whatever you have access to. Fusible fleece is a really nice one too, because you can usually pick that up at like a craft store or a local quilt shop, but if you get the kit, it's gonna come included. All right, so let's talk about color inspiration, because that can honestly be the hardest part of this project, right? It's like all the possibilities of what you can do. So this pattern was written for 6 different colors, which is really fun. You can get really creative. You can do kind of like an ombre of colors. I almost did like an ombre of blues, much like this quilt behind me, of blues, and then just do like a really fun printed background. That's always really cool. You can do a color scheme like this. You can even do a monochromatic look. So if you want to make it very traditional checker, like black and white, you certainly can. You're just gonna need, basically, when you look at the chart, it gives you all the cuts you need, so you're just gonna add them up. So instead of having like all the 6 for each, you're just gonna do 24 of the one color, 24 of the other color, and that'll make sense when we actually start doing the cutting. But it's really simple, so it's a really easy modification if you just wanna do like 2 colors. As far as picking fabric for this project goes, if this is like your first kind of beginner project and you're just starting out, I highly recommend you stick with 100% cotton. Make your life simplified. Don't do anything stretchy. Don't do anything textured or woven. Keep it really simple for this project until you kind of get the ropes of things. And if you can, stick with the more high quality stuff. It's going to have a tighter weave. It's not going to stretch and like unravel on itself. So these are Michael Miller cottons. These are wonderful. There's lots of other brands out there too. You can do prints, you can do solids, you can do blenders, meaning like little tiny prints like this. There's so many possibilities. I'm going to throw up some like little inspos that I put together. My favorite place to go for inspiration is actually Pinterest. I'll just go on there and I'll type in 6 color palette schemes and all these different pictures will pop up. Sometimes I even get inspired by pictures of nature. I've been doing this for such a while now, like when I go on trips and vacations and when I visit new places, I'll see a beautiful scheme of something and I'm like, that's a really nice color palette, and I'll take a picture of that. So this is definitely the fun part. Take advantage of your coloring sheet that you have at the end too, so that way you can kind of, you know, put your ideas together. You can even take little pieces off of the swatches and do that. As far as the fabric requirements, I don't know if I already said this, but you need 1/3 of the background, and then for the 6 colors, you do need a fat 1/8. If you want a fat quarter will give you a little bit more. I would honestly prefer you get a fat quarter, especially if this is your just first starting out project, like you've never made this project before. I would definitely try doing that, so you have a little bit extra in case if you make any boo-boos. But have fun with your color inspiration. This is the best part of the project, picking all your colors and all that fun stuff. So get to doodling, and then when you have it ready, let's start cutting and ironing. All right, so step number 1 as we start getting ready for this project is gonna be ironing all of our fabric. So some supplies you're gonna need, something you're gonna want to have, especially if you're just starting out this hobby of sewing, is you're gonna wanna have either an ironing mat or a wool mat or something that you can iron your fabrics on. That's super, super important no matter if you're doing this project or your next project. It's making sure your fabric is nice and crease free, all right? So I'm working on a wool mat. This is available on JukiJunkies.com. It's fabulous. I'm gonna link down below in the description for you guys, the pattern, all the supplies that you need here today, so that way you can just follow along really easily. But if you need a wool mat, this is a great option. So I also have my iron here. You don't need anything super fancy schmancy as far as the iron goes, just something to get the job done, especially if you're just getting into this hobby, okay? So here is just one of my fabrics so far. So remember how I said a fat quarter is definitely gonna be a little bit more forgiving. It's gonna allow you to have a little bit of extra in case if you make a boo-boo. As far as cutting instructions go, your background fabric A, B, C, D, E, and F, all the fabrics are the same cut. So we're gonna make sure we press everything out before we start, because all these creases and wrinkles can cause the fabric to not be that accurate measurement. So imagine I cut it like right here where this big crease is, and I cut it to be 3 by 3 while the crease is there. When you flatten out the crease, it's gonna make that fabric expand, and then it's not really 3 by 3 anymore. It's gonna be more like 3 1/4. And if there's one piece of advice I can give you when it comes to sewing, is really take your time with cutting and measuring and ironing out all your fabrics. This step is crucial to make all the pieces come together. I always say quilting and anything really in sewing is very much like baking. All the measurements have to be perfect. It has to be, if the recipe says a tablespoon, it has to be a tablespoon. If the pattern says 3 by 3, it has to be 3 by 3. In order for everything to come together to make one big piece, all right? So if you're just starting out, you're gonna wanna make sure you put your iron on the appropriate setting. So this is the linen and cotton setting, and I'm gonna start ironing out all the creases on all of my fabrics here today, all right? So whether you're doing 2 colorway, whatever you're doing, get everything nice and prepped, including your backing, including all of the fabric that you need, get it all crease free. If budget permits, this is definitely something nice to have in your stash. Best Press is awesome. It's actually a starch. We have a smaller package on JukiJunkies.com too. I like to give my starch a shake to kind of make it foamy, make sure everything's nice and evenly distributed. Distributed, that's a new word. And we're gonna spray it on the fabric, give it a second to cool down, and then you can always iron it. Starching your fabric allows the fibers to kind of stay a little bit more locked in, so that way they don't warp on you, they don't move, they don't stretch. That's another reason why I recommended using a more high quality cotton, so that also gets a little more illuminated with the more fancier stuff you buy. But this is definitely a nice solution. So you just spray it on, let it kind of saturate in there. Sometimes I even use the other fabric, like for example, I'll do something like this, and then I'll just use this fabric, the other side, to kind of get it in there, or if you have a scrap. And then you can go ahead and start ironing. Some people like to do it on the other side too, so you're not doing it like directly on there, because that sometimes can cause a slight discoloration, but nothing too crazy. And you're just gonna start ironing away. If you're shopping for the Best Press on the website, this happens to be the Lavender Thyme smell. These are phenomenal. There's so many good smells. There's like Caribbean beach and fresh linen scent, and then of course there's an unscented one as well if you're kind of sensitive to that too. But this is awesome. The lavender one I would definitely recommend. 10 out of 10. It smells delicious. All right, so now that we have everything nice and prepped, I did expedite a lot of the cutting just for your guys' time's sake, but all of these cuts, all of the fabric from A to F, even the background, is all the same size. So they're just 3 by 3, so follow along in your chart. You're gonna need 24 of the background color, and then you're gonna need 4 each of all the 6 colors that you picked at 3 by 3. Remember, if you're doing a monochromatic look, you're gonna just add all these up. So you'll notice that just equals up to 24. So you just need 24 of the background, 24 of the regular, so that way it looks something like this. As far as cutting goes, what you're gonna need here for supplies is you're gonna use some sort of ruler. This one's a little bit longer than the one I prefer. There's a 6.5 by 12.5 that I absolutely love. It's like this big. That was the first ruler that I ever got when I first started sewing, and I think that's gonna get you a long way. If you have a larger work area, you can totally do something bigger like this one. This is the 6.5 by 18.5. These are also Creative Grids rulers. These are worth every penny. In sewing, it's all about having the right supplies, and sometimes there's things that are overkill and sometimes there's things that you really don't need, but when I'm telling you, this is worth the money. Creative Grids rulers have non-slip grips on the back, so they actually help stay onto the fabric and not shift like other rulers do, so I would highly recommend these, and if you're lefty, they do make them left-handed too. So as far as getting this ready, I'm just gonna fold my fabric in half just to have an easier work area to cut with, and we always start by making a straight edge first. So your fabric's not going to be straight on any of the sides, so you just kind of have to figure out which way to go to get that first clean cut. So you need your ruler, you need a cutting mat to obviously cut on, and you're going to need a rotary cutter or something. You could even use scissors if you're just starting out. You're just going to need to draw the line first and then cut it out, but you're definitely going to want a rotary cutter. This is just a 45 millimeter. This is about a standard size. The Olfa brand is really nice. We have a couple on Juki Junkies as well. I'll link that down below. But a rotary cutter is going to be your saving grace for doing these type of projects, or just anything in sewing. All right. So we're just going to cut it to have a clean edge. All right, and then I flip it around. And my rule of thumb when it comes to cutting is to make sure you're always using one method. Okay, so if you're either using the markings on your actual cutting mat or use the markings on your ruler, because this and this do not have the same markings. So if you sometimes conveniently use this and sometimes you use this, you might notice some discrepancies in your cuts. So make sure you're, just sticking to one method. May it be that, may it be this, whatever you prefer. So I'm gonna cut out a little 3-inch strip and then I'm gonna start cutting. So I'm just using the ruler to help guide me to the edge of my fabric. I do use the cutting mat to keep my fabric straight. So if you notice, I'm aligning the top of this fabric with this line right here, just to know that I'm keeping the fabric straight and I'm not cutting it at a funky angle, but I'm using the measurements on my ruler, not the mat, okay? So whatever you prefer, you won't know until you try. So try both ways and see what makes you happier. All right, so I cut my little 3-inch piece, And you only need 4, but I would recommend cutting a couple extras because you can totally, when it comes down to laying all this out, it's kind of nice to have a couple extras, but you'll have some extra fabric here as well. Now that I cut the strip out, this edge right here, one is folded and one is all raw. This is also not a straight edge, so we're gonna trim that up. Again, using the mat to keep me straight. I'm using the lines on the mat to guide me to be straight, especially horizontal and vertical, just to make sure I'm not going crooked. All right, so there you have that. And now we're gonna start cutting out our 3-inch squares. As far as like collecting rulers for your stash, it's kind of nice to have a rectangle ruler and a square ruler. When I made this project at home, and make sure you have a sharp rotary cutter. When it comes to collecting rulers, it's nice to have a square and a rectangle because especially with projects like these, a rectangle ruler can kind of be big and awkward to work with. When I did this project at home, I have a square ruler that I think is about 8 by 8 or 8.5 by 8.5. And that's really, really nice. I don't have tons of rulers at home. I have my 6.5 by 12.5. I have a square. I have a couple smaller rulers, and I have one really big ruler. So that's what works for me. But I'm gonna cut my extra just in case. Let's see if I can get it. Oh, it's just shy. Let's see if I can get it. Oh, look at that. Does it open? Oh, just about. So we're gonna trim this just to make sure I can get it. There we go. Those will be my backup pieces. But I have my 4 here, and then you're just gonna repeat this process for all the colors until you have everything ready to go. And then the funnest part of this, the hardest part is done. The funnest part is up next. We're gonna start to assemble the colors and play around with the layout. Really quick before we start assembling, let's just make sure our backing is ready. Binding I'm gonna cut last, just mainly because I haven't decided on which binding I wanna do. So I'm gonna have everything else prepped and then we'll cut binding together. If you follow along in the chart, it'll tell you what your binding needs to be cut at. You just need 2 strips that are 2.25 by 44 inches. So if you want to get a little head, you totally can, but I'm gonna save that step for last just so I can really pick the perfect binding. So as far as your backing goes, 22 by 17 is the size that you need. That's fat quarter friendly there, so you totally can do that. Remember, I'm working with Fusible Fleece, and Fusible Fleece has one side that is fusible. So there's little grippy dots on one side. So the reason I like doing this is because it's kind of like a cheat. I don't have to worry about the layers shifting on me. I usually always work with Fusible Fleece when I do smaller scaled projects like table runners, anything smaller, you know, just because it's just easier to work with. You fuse it on here, and then when we have the top done, we're gonna plop the top on top, and then we're gonna do the quilting. So if you're doing the Fusible Fleece route, make sure you find the rough side and the smooth side, and you put the rough side on the ugly side of the fabric. So this is the right side where the main part is, and then the back side is the ugly side. So you put the grips on the ugly side so that way the glue dots fuse onto there. If you're just using regular cotton batting, you can do 100% cotton or 80-20, doesn't really matter. You're gonna put these together and you can pin it in place, or just honestly ironing everything into place will kind of grip it all together, but I'll show you the pinning method when we have the top all assembled. So for right now, I'm just gonna go ahead and start fusing this onto the backing and getting everything prepped, but you don't have to do this. This is totally optional, but I just wanted to give you my rhyme or reason as to why I like doing this. I even like to use Fusible Fleece when I do wall hangings too, just because I feel like I have more control over the quilting. I'm gonna get this all ironed out and fused on. This takes a little bit of time, so let me zoom through this and then we'll get to putting all of our colors together. So before we start following out the layout, which you'll find in the pattern, it's gonna give you kind of a starting point, but these can always be moved around. We're gonna label these, all right? So no rhyme or reason to them. I think it's better that you kind of keep your color balance separated, so don't just do like dark to light unless that's the look you're going for, but just kind of mark them as whatever you want for right now, but it's just gonna give you something to start with. So A through F, no rhyme or reason here, but the beautiful thing is that we can rearrange them as we need to. All right, so there's those pieces. All right, and then this is my background, my little stack there. So following out the layout, you'll see in the chart, kind of gives you something to start with. The blocks that aren't labeled, that's your background. So it's pretty easy going here. But since everything is the same size, if you cut a couple extras of everything, which I gave you enough to do that, it's nice. I think I cut 6 of everything instead of 4, just if I wanted to manipulate my colors. So just starting out, following out my layout, that first row is gonna be one of these, one of A, then we have another one of these, Then you're going to do B. Then you're going to do one of these again. I'm just going to grab a stack of these because this is the color that's most repeated. And then color C. Another one of these. And D. So this is my first row. All right, so really you just keep following this same layout, and then you can come back and rearrange and move around any colors if you feel like you want a certain color next to another color or whatever. So let's go ahead and just keep this process going until we have the full mat, and then if I want to move around any colors, we certainly can. All right, so I'm so happy with how this looks. I don't think I'm going to move a single color because I just think this is so fun and it looks really good. So as far as your coordinating here, this is just your layout. If you're not happy, as you notice I have some extras there, you can feel free to rearrange them as you like. You could even do like an ombre, you know, from your blues to your lighters. There's so many fun things you can do with this. As far as finished size of this is 19.5 by 15 inches once we get it all sewn together. I use this as my little laptop mat. That's what I've designed it for. I have a Mac, so I use this just on my keyboard. You can manipulate this to be larger or smaller. You can make this go under a sewing machine. You can make it go under a laptop. You just need more squares, okay? So if you get the kit, you'll have plenty. You're just gonna kind of keep the layout going here, but you just need to cut more things. But I'm super satisfied with how this looks. So what you gotta do now to start sewing is I like to work in rows. So like what I'll do is I'll go over to my sewing machine like this. I'll collect one row at a time, just like in the layer in the setup it needs to be. And I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to start sewing this. As far as your sewing machine goes, we just need a straight stitch, nothing fancy. Whatever sewing machine you have at home, you should be able to get a straight stitch. So let's go over there and I'll show you how to set up the machine for piecing all the first row together. All right, so I'm at my TL18 QVP. This is an awesome straight stitch Juki, and I'm set up currently on the ELEANOR cabinet, which is a hydraulic table. I can adjust the height, which is perfect for me because I'm super tall. Even if you're super short, this is nice because you can set it up to stand and sew, which I'll be doing for this tutorial. So this is nice. You just press the buttons, it lowers, or it'll lift. It'll do what you got to do there. You can drop this down and get an insert for it so it can be all nice and flush. And then if you notice on the left side of the table too, we have a little leaf. So this can hold your extra things, your projects, or bear a quilt, whatever you have on there. But this is the setup that I'm working with. Check out this ELEANOR table because this is a really nice setup, and a hydraulic table is just awesome. If you've never stood and sewn before, it's really nice. All right, so let's talk about a couple of the settings before we set up the machine for 1/4 inch. This right here is where my stitch length is. You gotta locate on your machine where you can adjust your stitch length, but for piecing, we wanna do something at like 2 or right under 2. The reason I prefer right under 2 is because I'm working with glide thread. Glide thread is a beautiful 100% polyester thread with a gorgeous sheen. It looks so pretty right now. She's like a paid actor in the background. Super nice. So this is a beautiful sheen. It's very strong. It's virtually lint-free, and I use it for everything: piecing, quilting, bag making, you name it. So with this, since it's a nice silky thread, I like to make my stitches a little bit tighter just to make sure things don't unravel, especially at the beginning and the end of a seam. All right. So I have my machine threaded, ready to go, and that's really all you need to do here. If your machine has anything like presser foot pressure, this is like a whole topic in itself, but this is just the amount of pressure that's being applied to the project. Okay. I like to set mine about middle ways. You might want to look at your machine to see what's standard, but honestly, if you're just starting out, don't really worry about this too much. But if you have the TL, this is a good thing to know. I put mine right in the middle. All right. As far as getting a 1/4 inch seam allowance, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can put the foot on the machine that's going to give you a 1/4 inch, meaning when I sew and I follow the right side of this foot, I'm going to get my 1/4 inch that I need for this whole project, okay? If you don't have a foot that gives you a 1/4 inch, it's going to be nice to have something like a magnetic gauge. We do sell this on JukiJunkies.com. It's just a really strong magnet that magnets onto the plate, and it's not going anywhere, but it's nice because it still lifts and gets out of the way. You can use this on any machine that has a metal plate. If yours is plastic, unfortunately it won't work, but if you have a metal plate, this will work on it, okay? So you don't have to have a Juki for this. I like to use something small like this. This is a 1.5 by 6.5 inch ruler. This is probably my favorite Creative Grids ruler. What I'll do is I'll drop the needle down and I'll find my 1/4 inch marking on this, and you'll notice on the ruler right here, it's this black dashed line. It says 1/4 inch. I'll line up the needle with that marker, like that, and then I'll just move my seam gauge to it. Let me make sure. something like that. And as you can see, it aligns up with my foot, so I know I'm right on the money there. But that's how you would find your 1/4 inch seam allowance if you didn't have a foot that gave you it. This foot that I have on the machine is called the hinged 1/4 inch foot. This is a high shank foot that's used for the Juki TLs, but if your machine uses high shank feet, you could probably get away with using that too. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and start sewing. I have some sewing pins ready for me here. You can, whatever sewing pins you prefer, especially when you're just starting out, it's just nice to have some. These are really nice. These are like an ultra grip type of pin. I'll drop them down below for you guys, but the handle on these are really nice. They're like ribbed, so they're really easy to grab. They're also heat resistant, which is really nice, and I like them especially because they're super, super long. So we'll link these down in the description below for you so you can kind of see those are ribbed at the edges. They're really great. So these are the ones I'm going to be using. So since I grabbed my stack here, however you prefer, sometimes when I grab all these fabrics to piece them together, I'll actually use a wool mat and I'll just keep it in the row so I know what's the sequence. But again, just take your time with this, make sure you're piecing them correctly. But we're going to take our first two and we're going to put them right sides together, make sure everything is nice and lined up. And at this point, if you'd like to, you can certainly pop a pin to hold your layers together, just to make sure you're edge to edge, just like this. And make sure you're putting right sides together, because in sewing, everything is done backwards, okay? So I'm gonna set my stack over here. I'm gonna move my pins out the way, and we're just gonna go ahead and start. Make sure your stitch length is nice. You're doing your 1/4 inch the whole way through unless otherwise stated, and let's get sewing. So there's my first seam. I'm gonna take out my pin, and voila, just like so. So you're just gonna keep going. You're gonna add your next one. You're gonna put it right side down and just follow the edge of that fabric either with your guide or your foot, however you're getting that 1/4 inch. I would recommend always measuring it out instead of using your plate. Some people's plates have markings. Just make sure your markings are accurate, you know, because I know some people's aren't. So there's my next one. So looking good, all right? And then when we're all done with this, we are gonna press our seams open, but we're gonna do all the rows together first and do the pressing last, okay? So you can either use pins, no pins, whatever you prefer. This is a pretty small stitch, pretty small seam. It's only 3 inches, you know? So it should be pretty good to go. All right, and we're just gonna make that row. So let's sew this all together, and then we're gonna do the next row, and then we'll do all of our pressing. And if you're paying attention to the Band-Aid on my finger, that means you're not paying attention to what I'm doing. I got a boo-boo, you guys, and I should have pretty Band-Aids. I think I'm gonna invest in some pretty Band-Aids if I ever have to wear a Band-Aid when I do these. It was really funny when I was picking out all the colors for this project. I was actually just telling Kylie, I was like, these colors are not my colors. It's just not my forte. Like, my home is so boring compared to these fun colors, but I live through my fun, colorful side through sewing. So I challenge you to do something different. Do something fun. Be inspired by maybe a fabric that you have, or of course just look on Pinterest too. But it's really fun to do something out of your comfort zone, because this is probably gonna be the most colorful, fun thing that's in my house now. You can certainly do a back tack stitch at the beginning and the end, but since my stitch length is so tight, I don't ever have a problem with that. But if you are just starting out, and I know some people teach things a little differently, but you can do a little reverse stitch at the beginning and the end, but if you just make your stitches a little tighter, you won't have to worry about that. So here is our first beautiful, colorful row. So I'm gonna set this to the side. I'm gonna grab my second row, and we're just gonna keep doing this until all of our rows are nicely assembled. Now that you have all of your little rows put together, if you got confused on what row is what, just feel free to refer back to the pattern so that way you can see the layout of things. You should have it all labeled out. But what I like to do is I'll just label these like row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so then I know that way too. But just label it as you go so you don't get confused. But right now you have your little rows all put together, and we're going to press our seams nice and open. And what I mean by pressing them open is you're going to take your finger, your index finger, and just kind of press that seam that's closed open. All right, now there is some controversy around this. Some people like to press their seams to one side. If that's you, press it to the darker side, okay? But I like to press my seams open because it makes for me, I find that all my layers connect better. and I'll show you that when I do my pinning method, but just take some time here to press all of your seams open as you go. Make sure you're not really like dragging too much on your project, especially once everything's all pieced together, because fabric, especially cotton, has stretch to it. So it has a warp and it has a weft and it stretches one side versus the other. So you want to make sure you're really gentle when it comes to pressing, that you're not dragging it out and deforming it. So just have a light hand. I know it looks like I'm dragging, but I'm telling you, I'm like floating on top of this fabric. Repeat that to all of your rows and then just lay it out how we're going to piece it, and then we're going to put it all together. Okay, so all of our seams are nicely pressed. They're open, so you can see everything is exposed. You see the right side of the fabrics now. Make sure you're happy with the layout. Make sure it's how you want it to be. You can refer to that chart again just to make sure things are right, but I love putting the backing and the top all together because it really is just, I'm so excited to do this all together. It's gonna be so much fun. So now we're gonna start pinning, so I'm gonna show you how I get these seams to perfectly line up with one another to make a really clean design. All right, so you're definitely going to want to have pins for this step because this is going to make sure that your seams are nice and precise. So here's just a little bit of a close-up of what I meant by those seams are nice and pressed open. So all the way through each row, everything is nice and pressed. It's going to allow everything to lay nice and clean. So we're going to take row number 1 and row number 2, and we're going to put those right sides together like so. So now you should just be seeing the back sides. And we're going to start pinning those seams together. So as you can see, they're nice and open, so it should be pretty easy to kind of sandwich them on top of one another. And the key to get them perfectly matched up is to take your pin on the front side, poke it through the center, and then poke it through the center of those seams. You see how that pin is right in the middle? That's my little secret to getting that seam to perfectly match up. You see how it's perfectly aligned right there? So that's what we're gonna keep doing across the whole row and really making sure that those seams are on top of one another. And the beauty about this is if you do it at about a 1/4 of an inch, just rough balling it, poking through the center and then catching it on the back side. So that one's not quite centered, so let me try one more time. There we go, that's much better. And you just pin it and then you open it just to make sure everything is matching up. So you're gonna keep doing that process all the way through. Keep opening it as you're going to make sure that they're centered. All right, so now we're back at the sewing machine. As you can see, I have my whole row nice and pieced, and I opened it every single time just to make sure everything is lined up how I want it to. And you're gonna wanna make sure you sew nice and steady. I always like to have my little tray of pins next to me to collect things as I go. And then we're just gonna start going. Our stitch length is still the same. Literally nothing has changed. We're still sewing at a 1/4 of an inch. The most important thing to remember here is to just go really slow and make sure you're removing those pins as you go, okay? Your sewing machine, I don't care what they say. I've heard somebody one time tell me that their sewing machine had a pin detector. I just don't believe that. I would always suggest to take out your pins because all it takes is one accident for you to run over a sewing pin and throw your machine out of timing, and then you're really in for a fun. And then you have to take your machine to the sewing ER and it has to get fixed, and that costs money. So make sure you're just going slow and steady wins the race here. Take your time, slowly pull your pins out. I even like to use the pins to like lay the seam nice and flat up until I get to, you know, the needle, but just really go slow. Take your time, all right? Just opening it back up, you can see that we have those seams nice and lined up here, and we're just gonna keep doing that and adding all the rows and all the rows, and then when we're done, we'll go back at the ironing board and press this seam open just like we did that first time around, just like that. All right, so go ahead and keep adding those rows, pin as you go, and take your time. So we have it all pieced together, and it is just really coming to life now. You see it all come together, it's so cute. We're just gonna press those seams from those individual rows nice and open, just like we did in all of these seams when we were making the rows, okay? So go ahead and press them open. And then now after this, we're gonna start our quilting. We're gonna do our marking and our quilting, and that's like the fun part, you guys. The quilting is really fun, and then we're gonna get this bound, and you're ready to rock and roll. So go ahead and take your time. Make sure you're pressing your seams open. Remember, not tugging. I know it looks like I'm tugging, but I'm floating, okay? Wool mats are nice. The reason why you would want to get a wool mat is because when you have the heat here, it kind of gets trapped inside the wool and it's kind of circulating it. So it's kind of doing like a steaming effect. So you're ironing on the top, but the heat kind of bounces through the sheep's wool and then goes back underneath, so it's doing an extra nice pressing effect. You shouldn't really steam a wool mat. That is one thing I will add. So if you can try to avoid it, because since it's wool, you don't want to put a lot of moisture in there because it being a sheep's wool, it will mold. So if you have to replace yours a lot and you're wondering why, try to avoid the steam. So if you want to do a steaming, get like a traditional ironing board. So now let's put all of it together and start the quilting process. So we're going to grab our backing, make sure we have the wrong side up with the batting. Remember, however you've chosen to do it, I have Fusible fleece. So we're going to grab our quilted laptop cover and place the wrong side down, all those seams that we just pressed open, on top of the batting like so. And this is what we're doing right now, is we're creating a sandwich. Okay, so we're putting all the 3 layers together to get it ready for quilting, all right? So at this point, you can go ahead and just lightly even things out, and you can grab your iron and start to iron this down. It's gonna kind of naturally start sticking to the batting that you have underneath it, but you can always grab pins, especially if you're using a loose batting, not the Fusible fleece that I am. You would just wanna grab pins, and you'd wanna pin this like every fist distance to hold it into position. But we're gonna mark it first, and then you can do your pinning. So as far as quilting goes, if you look in the pattern, I just did corner to corner design, so like I ran through the blocks, and I think that's gonna be perfect for this project. You could absolutely do straight lines here. You could do free motion quilting. You could do whatever makes you happy here. And the fun part about this coloring sheet too is you could kind of practice and doodle what you'd want to do here, how you want to quilt it. But this is honestly a really nice opportunity to play around with quilting and do some fun designs because it's small and good control here. But I'm just going to keep it simple and do this kind of like diagonal corner to corner design. In order to do that, you just want a little bit of a longer ruler. If you use a shorter ruler, it's gonna make life a little bit harder because you have to move it a lot. But I'm gonna use some sort of marking tool. I'm gonna use chalk. This is Taylor's chalk. It is phenomenal. It has kind of like tapered corners. This is really nice for garment sewing, for a lot of different things. I like chalk because it comes out, it stays nice and put, but it also comes out with a little bit of water. You can use friction markers, you can use all kinds of different tools. There's even water-soluble things. That's a great option too. But when you start sewing, you definitely want to have a little bit of variety when it comes to your marking tools. When I first started sewing, I had chalk and I had friction markers. So that could certainly be a good place to start. So as far as this goes, I'm keeping it pretty simple. I'm just kind of matching up my ruler from corner to corner just to hit right diagonally through all those little squares. All right. And I'm going to draw that first line. All right, so there's my first one. I'm going to go through this one now. All right, just like that. And then we're going to keep going. I might have to move my ruler on this one just a little bit. But it's always nice to pre-mark everything. Oop, I kind of got off course there. I'll just fix this one right here. There we go. So it's kind of nice to draw everything first because then it gets really, really simple when you go to quilt it. You can do fun designs with your walking foot. Free motion quilting is really fun. It would be really kind of cool to quilt this in like a gingham print where you kind of did straight lines within the solids. You could do like a really fun high contrast thread here so you could really, really see the stitching. There's quite literally a million possibilities, but this is a really fun project. I think it's really sweet to gift. We all have laptops nowadays. You could put it under your keyboard. You could put it under your laptop. I mean, you could make this larger and put it underneath your sewing machine. There's so many things you could do with this. So I have those first diagonal lines, and now I'm gonna go in the opposite direction to kind of make that X print. And I could do it one of two ways. I mean, I could have made these lines through the gingham, or I could do it through the solid. I kind of like doing it through the solid because you get to see the stitches a little bit more, but you could, you know, double up and you could do more lines and make this a little bit denser. So I only did on the solids as you see here, but I could have drawn lines within the gingham too. It would have been a tighter quilting, but with a smaller scale project like that, you don't have to do a lot of quilting, just preference. A good rule of thumb when it comes to how much quilting there should be, same fist distance rule. You don't want to make sure your spaces aren't larger than a fist distance. When you're doing quilting, that logic even applies more so to quilts because you want it to be nice and secure. So just drawing those lines. And then I usually have in my sewing room, like I go to the dollar store and I'll grab like cheapy little sponges and I'll dampen them just a little bit. And when I'm all done, that's how I get all the chalk out. So it's really easy. Honestly, if you just rub it with some like spare fabric or like batting, it comes right out. So you don't need anything too fancy there. All right, just a quick little pro tip about deciding which color thread to use when you're doing your piecing of your project. If you're working with really light colors, most of the time the color you use to put the project actually together won't matter too much. I'm working with a really kind of neutral warm gray 6 shade from Glide 40. This is a polyester thread, so this works just fine. It'll melt in with my project, but if you're working with really light colors, it's better to use something lighter, maybe like a light gray, a cream, an off-white, something along those lines, because you don't want to use a dark thread when you're working with light colors because it will show through. Cotton is not that thick, so you just want to make sure you're working with kind of a neutral shade. It's better to go lighter than darker, and if you're working with a lot of darker colors, definitely go a darker route because you don't want the thread to peek through it all through those seams. So darker for the darker threads, lighter for the lighter threads. So now we're going to set the machine up to do our actual quilting. A couple things we're going to change. I did switch out my thread. I switched it out to the color Peach by Glide 40. This is what I'm going to use on the front and the back for my quilting. I feel like that's going to melt in a little bit nicer than this darker shade that I had on there. We're going to adjust our stitch length to be like a 3.5 or closer to a 4. That's a more decorative top stitch. So when someone says top stitch, you always want to use a longer stitch because usually a top stitch is a more decorative finish. It's not a construction stitch. So you don't want to make it too big because you don't want the stitches to fall out naturally. You don't want it to be like a 5 or 6. That's more of like a basting stitch. 3 to 4 is usually a good rule of thumb for top stitching unless you're working with like specialty threads. As far as what foot I'm going to be using for quilting, it is nice to use your walking foot because it just helps with the extra set of feed dogs at the bottom to grab the fabric and feed it through a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and install my walking foot on my machine, and I'm going to adjust my presser foot pressure all the way up when you do quilting. So put that blue indicator to the top, meaning the least pressure possible. And I'm going to install this on here really quickly, and then we can just start following those lines. All right, to start quilting, I'm going to start with one of the more center markers, so either to the left or to the right, but I'm going to start following one that goes through the center. And the reason for that being is because if you tack down the center first, any unevenness is going to kind of wean its way out. You don't want to start onto the left or to the right because then you're kind of pushing in. There's more likelihood that things are going to shift on you. So feel free to kind of roll this up as you get ready. Also, if you've pinned this after you marked it, you could have certainly pinned it, but this is such a small project, it'll be fine for here. I'm just going to start towards this part, and I'm going to do a little back tack stitch, especially when I start off the quilt. And I'm just going to follow the lines that we drew. Nice and steady, making sure we're staying straight because the top stitch is the more decorative part of the project. So we want it to be really pretty, we want it to really shine, and we want it to be evenly fed through. And make sure you're not tugging on the project as you're working. The machine is doing the feeding, so there's no need to jam it through or, you know, put a pressure on the machine. Keep your hands very light, okay? Very, very light. I know it may look like I'm feeding it through, but I'm keeping my hands very soft, just making sure everything's nice and flat and staying in its lane. And then when I sew all the way off, I'm just gonna do a little back tack stitch and finish it off. So there is my first line that I just did. And now that I have that center secured, I can just keep going. And I usually like to do all the same direction first and then do the other way, just like how we did for the drawing. So again, starting off, just doing a little bit of a back tack stitch there, keeping my hands really light. Because if you start dragging it, you're gonna start noticing some inconsistent in your stitch length. So just go nice and slow and quilt your project as desired. All right, so we have our quilting all done. As you can see, there's still a little bit of chalk, but honestly, I could just go with my sweater and just kind of lightly press on it and the little chalk goes away. You can always use a little bit of like extra scraps or batting or water like I mentioned. I'm just gonna give this a nice little iron really quickly just to make it a little bit crisper. And then we're gonna trim off all the extra and square it off. Squaring it off is super important, so that way it's actually like the shape it's supposed to be. Move our iron out the way, and then we're gonna go ahead and start squaring this off. Squaring it off means we're gonna trim off all the extra and actually make sure that it's nice and symmetrical. So the way I like to do this is I'm gonna, the first cut is always the hardest because you wanna make sure that it's nice and straight. So you're gonna use a little bit of a longer ruler, And I'm definitely gonna help, have a little bit of help from the table to make sure that I'm nice and straight. But I want to make sure that if you have to cut into it a little bit to get it to be straight, that's okay. It's okay. It's worth it, so that way it's nice and straight. And you want to make sure you're not going into it too much, but just enough to have a clean edge, because by the quilting, it's normal for things to kind of shift and distort. So we're gonna make the first cut, and now from here, everything is easy. So I'd recommend doing that first cut on the smaller side versus the longer side, because this is the one that's just gonna set you up for success. Now I can use the table to help guide me to make sure that I'm nice and straight to trim off the rest over here. And what I'm gonna do is shift, and I'm using the line on the table to help me stay straight and make sure I'm cutting off the same amount the whole way. All right. 2 down, 2 to go, and it just gets easier really from here, because now I'm using 2 sides to keep me straight. And I'm going to use the table again. It's okay, we're going to cut off a little bit. And last side, use the table to guide you. I'm going to start trimming, and I'll shift up again. Take off the extra, and ta-da! Look how nice. So now it's all nice and squared off, ready to bind. There's a couple ways you can make this really, really fun. You can use your scraps that are left over from these little squares and do kind of an ombre binding. You can add some labels. Labels are always such a fun way to take an ordinary project and make it a little bit more fun. I think I'm gonna include one of these labels in the kits while supplies last. It says, "Good things take time," and on the back side it has a little flower. It's so sweet. I think I'm gonna like tuck it in right here, so that way when I'm working, it's my little friendly reminder that good things take time, just like flowers. So we're gonna get this going. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my binding, and it'll be a nice surprise for you because now that I have it done, I get to really pick what I want for my binding. I couldn't be happier with how this looks. The back is so fun. Look at those colors. So let's go find a fun backing or a fun binding, and I'll be right back. All right, so this is what me and Kylie picked. We thought this was really, really cute. I really like how it complements the browns, but also kind of gives that little red a little moment there. And then of course the back, it's like a no-brainer. This is all Ruby Star Society, so it's like perfect. So for the binding, remember we just need 2 cuts that are 2 1/4 inch by width of fabric. So width of fabric meaning it needs to be about 44, 45 inches wide. So again, we always start with a clean edge using our ruler. And then we're gonna cut out our 2 strips. Now, some people prefer to do 2 1/2. Some people prefer to do 2 1/4. I like 2 1/4. That's what makes me happy when I do machine binding. So just based on preference, but 2 1/4 is perfect for me. So there's my 1. And Kylie, remind me to change my blade after this. And then 1 more at 2 1/4. Right, and then you're gonna wanna make sure that you trim off the selvage. The selvage is like the fun text part, which I always love to store. I had like the cutest selvage actually from the backing of this project. I was trying to figure out where I could incorporate it, but I'll just use it in another project. It's so cute. So we're just gonna trim that off. And then now we're gonna join these together at our sewing machine, and then we're gonna prep it. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna take our 2 ends, you're gonna grab one of them, and you're gonna make a little 90-degree angle. You're gonna put right sides together just like this, and then you're going to sew from corner to corner. So I'm gonna grab just a little marking pen and draw it out for yourself. Well, usually what I like to do, my first mark that I make, is I figure out where's the corner over here, and then I figure out where's the corner over here. And you want to do it from the upper left corner to the bottom right corner, because that way, and I'll show you, you can always check yourself. Always check yourself before you sew it down so then you don't have to seam rip. Because who wants to seam rip? Not me. So if that's there, you can always kind of mimic, and when this opens, it's going to make one big strip. That's how you know you did it correctly. Okay, so you can always pop a little pin there on the line that you drew to make sure, because the point is we're adding it together to make one long strip. So you're just going to take your little pin, pop it right there. All right, and then you're gonna go over to your sewing machine, you're gonna sew right on top of that line to make one big piece. And then we're gonna iron this open. All right, so now that we have it all joined together, really nice and flawlessly, we're just gonna trim off this excess really quickly. And you can just use a pair of scissors for this part. So we'll just trim it off at about 1/4 inch. Even if it's a 1/2 inch, it's okay. You can just eyeball it, but you definitely don't want to do anything smaller. All right, so just like that, just so the extra's off. And then we're gonna go ahead and press this seam open, just like we have been. So it stays nice and flat and out the way. And look how perfect, just perfect. Nobody would ever even know. Now to prep it for the actual sewing, you're gonna fold it wrong sides together like this, all the way to the end of the strip. If you're doing ombre style, that's definitely more of a challenge because you have to put a bunch of pieces together, but it is super rewarding. It is really fun to do the ombre style. I actually have a sample that I'll show you. I'll throw it up here really quick so you can see it. But the ombre style is really fun. You just use your scraps. It's a great way to use scraps so you don't have any waste, but it also kind of gives some extra movement in the project. It's really cool. So go ahead and just press, press, press until you reach the end. So now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna start to sew this. And how we do this is we're gonna grab our actual project and you're gonna grab the back. Keep your label close by if you're gonna do that. But you're gonna grab the binding and you're gonna attach it to the back side of the project and you're gonna meet the raw edge of the binding to the raw edge of the quilt. All right, so you're gonna do something like this. All right, and you're gonna wanna make sure that you leave like, I'm gonna say like, let's just say 10 inches, okay? So let's just say 10 inches. You wanna kinda center it up to the middle. Make sure you don't start at the edge because the corner, there's a special technique for the corner, so make sure you don't start, you know, all the way to the edge, like this, and you're gonna leave like a good 10-inch tail. So when you get to this side, we're gonna join the binding together, all right? So I'm gonna pop a pin there really quickly, just so I know for myself that that's where I'm starting. So just like here. You wanna make sure you leave yourself a good tail, because if you leave it too short, the joining of the two pieces gets difficult. So let's go over to the sewing machine and start sewing this all together. Back to our settings. So remember we had set the machine up for quilting. You wanna make sure that you drop your stitch length back down to a construction stitch, meaning like right under 2 or at 2, depending on your preference. I still have my matching thread. I did bring down my presser foot pressure back to its normal kind of middle place there if you're on the TL. I have my 1/4 inch presser foot. We're keeping that consistent throughout. And remember, we've put the binding onto the back side of the project, not the front, all right? Starting at about where my pin was or a little bit past it, just so I don't have to worry about removing it, we're just gonna follow the edge of the binding, and I always do a back tack stitch there, really important. And I'm just sewing along at 1/4 inch to the edge of the binding and the edge of my mat. When you start to approach a corner, especially if this is your first time doing binding, it might be good for you to draw a little 1/4 inch indicator for yourself to know to stop, but you're gonna sew till about 1/4 inch to the edge of the fabric. And I always do a back tack stitch here. You're gonna trim it, all right? So it looks like something like so. You're gonna grab your binding in your right hand, left hand, however you prefer. And the goal here is to make a 90-degree angle where the binding meets up in the corner of the project. So you see how it's perfectly angled, all right? Then you're going to bring it and act on that fold. So kind of finger press it, makes it a little bit easier. And then bring this down to join it with the bottom. Okay, so you see that? One more time. I stopped at 1/4 inch, going up to make a angle. And then I'm just bringing it over on top of that little triangle that we made to match with the bottom, okay? So now you're gonna rotate your project and you're gonna start sewing on the opposite side. You're still gonna have a flap over here. You wanna make sure you don't close that. It has to look like this. Do a back tack stitch here as well, just to keep it nice and reinforced. And then start sewing as normal. I am gonna cut the thread just to show you really quick this little section, so it should be kind of raised like this, all right? It'll look something like that. That's what it looks like, all right? So you're just gonna keep sewing along until you make your way to almost the edge, okay? All right, so this is my last corner. So this is exactly why I said don't go all the way to the corner, because obviously you're doing one more corner, so you don't wanna have your finish or beginning of your tail on the edge of the fabric, because it'll be really hard. So here's my 10 inches right here. I'm gonna sew about, I don't know, maybe like 6 inches into the, away from the corner, from your last corner, and I'm gonna do a back tack stitch right there. All right, so there is that. So now I have 2 long tails. All right, so last two little guys right here, your last two tails. This one is way too close to this edge, so I am gonna trim this back a little bit. All right, maybe 3 inches or so. The goal here is to give yourself, there's no exact measurements here. The goal is to give yourself room to work, okay? So you don't wanna make sure you're too close to this, but you don't wanna make sure you're too close to this edge either, because the way we're joining our seams, we wanna make sure we have room to work, okay? There's 2 ways you can do binding to finish this, and I'll show you both ways, depending on your confidence level. The little extra you just trimmed off is gonna be your reference to know how much to trim this. So from the little point that you just trimmed, you're gonna take I'll use the wrong side so you see it better. You're gonna align it up with the piece you just cut underneath, and that's how much you know to cut off. So I'm gonna cut that much off, all right? This is the more professional way to finish it, but if you wanted an easier way to finish this, you could, on one of these ends, fold this at about 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 of an inch, give it a good little press at your iron, okay, like this, and create a finished edge. Then you could take your binding and you could tuck it in like so, and do a look like this. This is definitely the much easier route, and maybe this is a good place for you to start, but I'm gonna show you the way that I like to do it, the more professional finished way, okay? So now I have both of my tails. I'm gonna take the tail in my right hand, and I'm gonna open it up and see the pretty side to face me, and I'm gonna bring it to the left, my left band, my left tail, and I'm gonna make the pretty side meet up like this. So here I am, so you get the visual, grabbing both of my hands. I'm flipping the right to face me, and I'm matching it up like this. All right, and I'm gonna do this. And in the process of that, while I make them match up like this, I'm gonna pop a pin in there to hold this into place. And then in the other side of this, to make it a little bit easier to work with, I am gonna pin this away from this tail. So then that way it makes it a little bit easier for me to get it into my sewing machine, like this. So this is much easier to work with now. So now, much like how we joined our binding together, we need to sew corner to corner. So top left-hand corner to bottom right-hand corner. You can use a ruler. I always like to find the edge. So like here's one edge, and then here's the other edge over here. And then I know that I need to sew from this point to that point, okay? Following along, hopefully that's nice and clear for you. I do have a really in-depth video on binding as well on the Juki TLs. You can check out that class on jukijunkies.com. But now all I'm gonna start doing is sewing from that corner to the other corner. Make sure everything is nice and flat, nothing is getting puckered. And if this is getting hard, that means that you trimmed too much. That's why it's really important to kind of just make sure you have enough room to work with. All right, so now I'm gonna take this pin out, and we're gonna see how that held up. And yeah, that looks good. So it's not too loose. I can already see when I put this all in place, it's gonna be good. This is gonna get flipped around. So this is perfect. You have this little excess right here, just like you did when we were adding binding. You're gonna trim it down to 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch. You can eyeball it. There's no like crazy rule here. Just make sure it's not super close to the seam. So 1/4 inch, all right? And then you'll press that seam open just like we have been. And you're gonna go to the sewing machine and just finish closing this out. And now you have a beautiful finished look that's precise, but you can always do it the other way too if you're just growing your confidence in doing this method. All right, so we finished that. So it's really nice and cohesive. Really quick to add our little tag. I like to do my binding first and then add my tag because doing it any other way can kind of make it shift. So I'm just going to have my project. I'm gonna figure out where exactly I wanna put my tab. I really wanna put it in this little gingham corner, because I think that'll be really cute. This is a sew-in tab, so it's nice. I'm just gonna align it up, and I'm gonna take it over to the sewing machine, and I'm just gonna sew right at 1/4 of an inch, or maybe even a little bit less, maybe like 1/8 of an inch, just to catch it. Like this. And then when we close our binding, when we bring this to the top, it's gonna hide that little seam perfectly. All right, so you can just pick where you wanna put your tag, just stitch really close, and now we're ready to do the top stitching of the binding. All right, so to do the binding part, this is totally not a necessary thing, but I really do prefer it, especially if you have the Juki TL series, the TL18, TL98, TL2010, whatever you have that starts with a TL, this is a great foot. This is the left compensating foot. It has a little guide on the left side. This is going to help us top stitch the binding super, super easily and swiftly. So I already have one installed on my machine right now. We're going to set our stitch length back to a nice pretty top stitch length, okay? And it really does help if you have quilt clips. These are quilt clips. These are fabulous. If you don't have these, definitely worth the investment. I promise you, these are phenomenal no matter what kind of sewing you're doing. The best way to do this, here, we'll start on the side with the pretty label, because why not? We're gonna flip over the binding to the top like this, and you're just going to start to clip as you go. I find that if you clip in sections, you're gonna have a much better time and much better results, consistency all the way around. These little fuzzies too, if you have like a lot of fuzzies like this, you can always grab scissors and trim them off just to make life a little bit easier. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, just trim them off. And then we're just gonna keep folding over like this. And I would do every, like, I don't know, maybe 1.5 inches or so. I get kind of excessive, so I'm trying to be not too extra right now. I like to do the whole project in one whirl, get all my pinning done, or my clipping, should I say, and then just do the top stitching in one whirl so I don't have to cut my thread, none of that stuff. So when it comes to doing the corner, this is how I like to do the corners. So you're gonna have one side clipped. I like to kind of clip, I don't know, maybe 2 inches down from the corner, 2 inches from the other side, so then I have just this little corner like this. The best way to do it, the best way I describe it, is you start to fold down this side and then you pinch it and you're kind of like rolling the fabric to make that perfect like mitered corner. So as you can see here, this is a little overlapped. So I'm gonna try again, I'm gonna pop this down and I'm just gonna, it's all about how you pinch and pull. So you see, I got it to lay much better now. So it's nice and mitered. So it's just about grabbing it, manipulating the fabric, and pinching it over. Once you have it exactly how you want it, it's gonna be nice and in that corner. You can clip for that extra reinforcement and then just keep going all the way around. Oh, I love that the little flowers are poking through. They're so cute, it's so fun. All right, so look how good. It gives you an idea of what it looks like. It looks so stinking cute. It says, good things take time. So now we're ready to do our final top stitch. And this foot is just really gonna change the game. It changes your life. It changed my binding outlook. I used to hate binding and now I absolutely, it's probably my favorite part of the project. So my stitch length is about 3.5. The guide on this foot sits right, the binding sits right on that guide to the left side. There's even a little groove or an indentation to help feed that binding through. So now we're gonna go ahead and start and have my bucket ready to actually use this part. And I'm gonna start clipping and placing. So you see how effortless this is? It's gonna give you a nice close, like 1/16 of an inch as you go. You can use a narrow zipper foot for this. You can use an adjustable zipper foot for this. You can even use your standard foot for this or something open toe so you have better visibility, but I wouldn't do open toe because you wanna have something to push down the binding. But you don't have to use this foot. I know not everybody's gonna be sewing on a TL, so you might not have this option. But it's definitely a really nice one if you do, but you could certainly make it happen with another foot. A narrow, or like a skinny zipper foot would be really good. Once I start approaching to that corner, I'm just gonna make sure everything stays nice and flat, so I'll lift and readjust. So right over the corner, pivot, and so far you can see how it stitches so perfectly on the edge, like all the way through. So you don't have to do anything fancy when you do those corners. Just keep going. Let the foot guide you. And just like that, you have a beautiful quilted laptop mat, and I hope that you enjoyed this project. I really try to make it simple for you, but I sometimes overcomplicate it because I want you to be creative and I want you to think of how you can make it your own and have fun with it. So I am so thrilled with how this turned out. That left compensating foot really just made things so nice. We'll do a little close-up to show you guys how beautiful and consistent it stayed. I love the little tab. It's just so much fun. And the quilting on the back. And the fabric, it's so cute. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are constantly posting new content for you every Sunday. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button to be notified and never miss out on the fun stuff. I'm hoping to do more fun sewing tutorials like this with you guys on the channel. And then of course, this is a free pattern, so hop on it. Make sure you check that description down below for all the links. If you have any questions, feel free to ask down in the comments below. I'm here to help. David answers a lot of questions I can chime into. That's not a problem at all. And share your pictures of your project. I cannot wait to see what fun and quirky color combinations you guys come with. So I'll see you guys soon. Bye.